Welcome to the Women Inspired podcast, brought to you by Modern Well, a beautiful woman-centered collaborative workspace in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm your host, April Seifert, psychologist, entrepreneur, and self-proclaimed life experience junkie. Each week, I will introduce you to a different woman who is succeeding and inspiring others in one way or another. We'll dive into her story, her successes, failures, and the lessons she has learned along the way, all with the goal of inspiring you to listen to that inner voice who keeps reminding you that there is something you want to take action on. You are so much more capable and powerful than you give yourself credit for. Inside of you is a woman on fire. Let's let her out and see what happens. Here we go. Welcome back to the Women Inspired podcast. My name is April Seifert, and I am your host, your friend, and your tour guide on these incredible interviews of inspiring women. I am thrilled you joined me this week. It's a huge week. It's a massive week. I cannot overstate it. This week, I get to share with you an interview that I recently conducted with a woman who I have admired for an extremely long time. She was actually, you'll hear me describe this to her, she was actually on the list of people that I would die to interview. At the beginning of the podcast, I made this list of people who I would just die to interview, but I never thought I would get to talk to. And I just got to spend an hour sitting across the table from her, asking her anything that I wanted to. This week, I'm introducing you to a woman named Nancy Lyons. She's the CEO of a company called Clockwork, an advocate for humans, and you'll totally see what I mean during the interview, and a self-professed weirdo. This interview went in such an awesome direction that actually it went in about 1 million awesome directions. But at one point, you'll actually hear me bang on the table. I got so excited by what she was saying. This interview is off the rails. I'm going to warn you. I know you're going to leave this interview revved up and totally inspired. It's impossible not to. So I am thrilled to introduce you all to the amazing Nancy Lyons. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Women Inspired podcast. And today is one of the coolest days in Women Inspired podcast history, because when I began the podcast, I started making lists of women that I thought I would contact. I was nervous about whether I would be able to get guests and who I would talk to. And so I made all these lists of women. And one of them was a list of women that I knew I could reach out to, that I talked to fairly regularly, that I knew I could get on the show. The next one was a little bit of a stretch, but I was like, okay, I think I know someone who knows this person. And then there was a third list where I was like, yep, I just don't know if that's possible. I don't know if I know anybody who knows this person, and I have no idea if they would be willing to talk to me. And today, somebody from that list is literally sitting across the table from me, and I'm so thrilled. So I am so excited to introduce all of you to Ms. Nancy Lyons. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm stinking thrilled, and I just feel like I need to put that out there on the table, because it just makes me feel a little bit less nervous or something like that, and I don't get this nervous very often for the podcast, so I'm really pumped.
You don't look nervous. Also, I'm nervous, so I'm nervous about meeting you. So we're in this together.
Awesome. We're going to make it through this, I swear. The way that I love to start these episodes is to help everybody just get to know each other a little bit. So give us a rundown of your background and help us get to know you up until this point.
Sure. Well, I've been working in digital and software development for about 25 years. And so I'm like a grandmother in the digital age. It's kind of funny. But when I was in school, I was a theater major, and I actually thought that I would be a comedian, which has served me really well. I always say that the best thing I ever did for myself was study acting in school, because in business, you have to be able to get up in front of people. You have to be able to read an audience. You have to be able to pivot on a dime. So while my parents thought that it was a useless education and that they were throwing their money out the window, they actually did me a huge favor by letting me do it. And so I was a theater major, thought I was going to be a comedian, actually did act for a period of time after school, did murder mystery dinner theater, met some of my greatest friends while waiting tables and acting in a variety of productions. But at some point I decided I needed to pay my bills. And right. And at some point in there, I also developed a fascination with the internet. So when I graduated from school, I actually graduated with a degree in media studies, and theater was then my minor. And I I started to pursue traditional production. So I was in like video production. And I realized that my life, if I stayed in that world, my life would be just an endless journey that involved getting coffee for white men and picking up dudes' children and their dry cleaning. And there were no women shooters. There were very few women directors. It was a really bizarre place to be. And I saw myself as having more to offer. And around this time, this was in the early 90s, the internet was bubbling up as a conversation point, and it intrigued me. I didn't have a computer until I was in, the end of college. And I wasn't somebody who was, particularly technically capable or interested. But that conversation started to be compelling to me. So I remember going with my mother. It was like Christmas time, and I was a poor, recent college grad, and my mother bought me a computer, and that was my Christmas present. And I always tell her, that career path was sort of sparked by that moment. And I taught myself how to code. So I learned to hand code HTML, and I got a book, and I tried to learn Perl. And I'm a horrible programmer, but what it gave me was a theoretical understanding of how that all worked and how it was coming together. And honestly, now I still have great value for people who are self-taught, now there are college programs for these things. There's certifications, there's postgraduate opportunities. When I was in college, computer science was, it happened on giant mainframes, and, the small computers were, the personal IBM computers were these monochromatic green screens, and you were still, it just wasn't personal. Yeah. It felt, really sort of manufactured, if you will. And when the personal computer really happened and became mainstream is when personal computing felt like something I could get my arms around. And so I started to experiment with it. And I realized that was what I wanted to do. So I was working for a communications firm. I started to explore the world of the internet. I met my business partners. They had worked for Prince, and they started a bulletin board service for Prince. So I don't know if you knew that. And that's,
like for Prince.
Yeah. So that we're going to deviate if I tell you the story, but I'm happy to tell you.
Holy
So my business partners, Mike and Chuck, worked for Paisley Park. Mike is a music producer, a sound engineer, a composer, a musician. He got his degree from the Berklee School of Music. Chuck is a brilliant designer and was a creative director at Paisley. And both of them worked with Prince. And so after his passing, both of them appeared on panels and documentaries and all sorts of stuff because they had personal relationships with Prince.
Wow.
So they had the start of my career actually happened because I met them, but they started the internet thing. So they were exploring the world of interactive on behalf of Prince. And Chuck has these great stories about how he remembers bringing in a desktop computer, a tower computer, into Paisley Park, plugging it into the wall and showing Prince how the internet worked. And he said you could see the little wheels turning in his head because suddenly Prince was like, wait, you mean I could talk to my fans? Like directly, I could have direct and then eventually he started to recognize that he could probably distribute his music himself.
Yeah.
So my business partner Chuck is directly responsible for some of the pushback that Prince created for his record label when he realized that actually direct access to his fans, his audience, gave him more creative freedom.
That's amazing.
Isn't it crazy? So they started developing a community, an online community for Prince fans. And Prince got a little confused about what they were doing. He ultimately asked them to leave. They unplugged that modem from the wall. They took it to Mike's basement. They plugged it back in, and they started a bulletin board service called Bitstream Underground. And Bitstream, in its heyday, had about 8,000 artists and musicians that would connect with each other, and this was in the early 90s, in these chat rooms and talk about all sorts of things from they had a Target chat room, interestingly enough. They would talk about what it was like to go to Target for toothpaste and end up spending, $1,000 on everything else.
Of course.
Right? Everybody knows that, but they were talking about it in a digital space. And I think it's interesting because we think that the internet happened 10 years ago when some guy invented the Facebook.
Right.
But the reality is people have been connecting and exchanging ideas and information and creating community and making friends and other connections online for 25, 30 years and longer than that, even when you're super hardcore. So I think what they did was create community. And a lot of those people are still friends. I joined that BBS. A lot of those people are still friends on Facebook. A lot of those people are still friends in real life. And when I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in technology, I reached out to them. I reached out to a few others, and they did not respond to me. I didn't know them. I sent them my resume and cover letter, and they were like total Gen X. They were what you would imagine, long hair, flannel, early 90s, right?
Yeah.
Gen X, like weirdo, creative types.
Yeah.
They totally ignored me. So one day I thought, I really want to meet these guys. So I sent them another note and I said, listen, I sent you my resume and you didn't respond. I need to talk to you. And if you don't respond to me, I'm going to stalk you. And about 10 minutes later, I received a reply and we started talking after that. And shortly thereafter, we started working together. And interestingly enough, they didn't have a job for me. And I was like, I need to work with you. Let's make this into a real company. Let's do this together. Let's you guys make sense to me. What you're doing makes sense to me. And they were like, we don't even know if we can pay you. And I said, okay, here's what I need to make for 3 months. And if you can pay me this for 90 days, if at the end of 90 days you don't think, if you think you can live without me, I'll leave. But if at the end of 90 days you don't think you can live without me, then we're going to negotiate a real salary. And they were like, okay, we can afford that. And at the end of 90 days, I had proven my point and I was working at Bitstream Underground. So that's a long story and it includes part of their story, but my story doesn't exist without them.
That's incredible. And the word that is like echoing in my head for so many reasons is the word gumption. Like you had this gumption around saying initially, I have more to offer, I think was exactly what you said. I have more to offer than just going and picking up people's kids and running around and doing other people's errands. I have more to offer than that. I can teach myself how to do this highly technical thing, which high five, sister, because I taught myself to code on Google. So it is out there. If you want to learn to code, you totally can.
Code Academy.
And now there's a million ways to learn to code.
Yeah.
Right? If you want to learn to code, you can. That takes serious gumption. And writing somebody back after they've completely ignored you and then threatening to stalk them.
I wouldn't recommend that now. That's not something I would recommend today.
Use a different word, like a nicer, less.
Yeah, I'll just be outside a lot.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Where did that come from? Have you always been like that? Did you cultivate that? Where did you get that?
It's always been who I am. And much to the chagrin of, the very traditional schools and teachers that I had in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up. I think now I will say, and I often credit that side of myself to my mother. My mother was a physician, is a physician. She's not dead. Sorry, Mom. And she went to medical school in the late 50s and was practicing medicine in the 60s when women were getting married. They were like what women were expected to do in post-war America was get married and have children.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think when the cultural message is this is what you do and you do something else, it's much harder. And I think so I grew up with a woman who was a professional and who grew up in a family of people that didn't go to college. She was the first person to go to college. She was 13 years younger than her next youngest sibling. And there were 8 kids in the family. She went to college. She went to medical school. She practiced medicine on a Navajo Indian reservation. She opened her own practice. She was a medical director. She was just driven. And my mother was a feminist, and we had really candid conversations about what it was like to be a woman in the world, especially a world that was largely dominated by men and male conversation.
Yeah.
And I think my mom was a model for me in a lot of ways. And I also think she didn't treat me like a child. She treated me like a person of worth. And we also weren't a family where there were 2 girls in my family. And there wasn't a lot of conversation about what we looked like. I mean, my mom wanted us healthy, but, we were all big women. The women in my family are big stock, right? They're big girls. And that wasn't less than. And what was important to her was get your education, because nobody can ever take that away from you. And it wasn't about being beautiful or being presentable it was always about being appropriate, but it wasn't about being pretty or being acceptable to men or, my mom used to say to me all the time, you can get married on any free weekend. Like your whole life isn't about planning a wedding. Because my friends, I remember, would talk about planning weddings in high school.
It's crazy. It happens in just a few hours. And then when you what I like to tell people is you wake up the next day and you're just somebody's wife.
Right.
And like that should be exciting.
Yeah.
That should be more exciting than the day, because like that's gonna be a long time that you're just gonna be somebody's wife, and that should be pretty cool.
Well, and I do think like, we live in a culture that's still, I mean, when my mom was talking to me about this stuff, I was a little kid, it was 40 years ago, right?
Yeah, that's huge.
And I think we're still having some of the same conversations,
Hugely.
same struggles, right?
Yeah.
And I think we still tell little girls you are half of something until you're married and then you're whole. And we say it implicitly, right? But we say it. And I think the modeling that I got from my mother is the thing that set me up for success, because I didn't believe I had to go out and get married. I didn't believe I had to be a girl in the traditional sense. And I don't want to make that sound like a bad thing, but it wasn't about the sort of stereotypical gender expectations.
It wasn't a requirement or an expectation or a rule.
Exactly.
For you. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was interesting because I have so many friends that were so gifted, dear friends and smart women that I went to like high school with, who had dreams, and we would talk about our dreams. And then they got married and they had kids and their dreams were over. And we still live in a culture that it sort of suggests that, well, if anybody has to compromise, it's you. I mean, you just got done saying, you got a baby at home and another baby on the way.
Yep.
And I always say in all the talks that I do that it's always the women. Like, men can be. And I just got done telling you my business partners are men. They're some of my best friends. I have no issue with men, but I do think we live in a culture where we aren't loud enough in talking about the fact that women get to have a career, they get to pursue excellence, and at the same time, they're still struggling with bearing the most burden around what happens at home. They're the ones juggling. Who cares for the kid? It doesn't matter how engaged or amazing your husband is.
Yeah.
You're doing that work. And he can be a prince among men, but your children are going to grab onto you in a different way than they grab onto their fathers. Yeah. And we live in a culture that recognizes that and takes advantage of it.
Totally.
And so there's not a lot of support for women in that space. And these are conversations that I was having with my mom 30 and 40 years ago.
Wow.
As a little kid at the kitchen table, because not only was it her life, but it was the lives that she witnessed in her practice.
Yeah.
So the women that came to her struggling, trying to figure out their lives and trying to figure out things like childcare and, balancing their budget and figuring out how to send their kids to college and figuring out how to feel value in their home construct and all of those things. That was stuff my mom would bring home, and that is what we were talking about. So the gumption is something I was raised with.
I love it. Oh my God. I wish you all were in the room with us and you could just feel the energy coming off of this. I'm going to have a really hard time coming down from my day and being home in the evening. It's awesome. Today, when I creep on you on the internet, when I stalk you, I see two sides to you. I see you as Nancy Lyons, crazy, amazing CEO of a company called Clockwork. Mm-hmm. I also see Nancy Lyons as champion for human beings in the workforce and how we show up as people, how we work within our lifestyle. I mean, I think there's a notion on your website around work-life balance and how that's kind of a crazy thing because they're so integrated these days. How did you find yourself wearing these hats? How did you get to the point where you're now leading this amazing company and you're also the person that everyone goes to in this market and others to talk about some of these important issues that companies need to hear?
You're very kind. I wish everyone would come to me and then we wouldn't have half the problems we have. I think that, first of all, I'm a weirdo. And I say that with a great amount of pride. I'm a weirdo. I'm somebody who, even as I talk about the gumption that my mother bestowed upon me or encouraged in me, I always knew that I was not like other women. I never dressed like them. I don't wear makeup. I wore makeup, when I was younger. I like to tell this story about how a drag queen once said to me, "Girl, are you wearing eyeliner or mascara?" And I said, yes. I was 20. And the drag queen said, "Don't ever do that again." And I was like, okay. And that's when you stop. You just don't wear makeup anymore because clearly you look like a clown. But I've always been a bit of a tomboy. I don't fit in. I've never really fit in. And I think we made work a lot about fitting in. Like work mirrors what we know of, work actually mirrors how we educate our children, right? It's very similar. It's like you shut up, you sit down, you fall in line, you pay attention, you listen, you do what you're told. Like that's what we've made work into. And there's a dress code. It may not be published, but you know what it is, right? There's what's acceptable at work. And then there's this idea, and I was just at an event last week where I had given the people that I was talking to a homework assignment, and I asked them to come up with value statements and then to talk about how those values show up in their leadership every day. And then to talk amongst themselves about what they discovered in that discussion. And what I heard them say was, wow, this was really hard. It was hard for us to talk about our values because it's so personal. And later when I got up, I said, it's interesting to me that you feel like your values are personal and that we continue to sort of hold this ideal up that suggests there's a difference between what I do personally and what I do at work. Because I don't think that's how we actually live. How we live, suggests otherwise. My identity is what I do. I'm Nancy Lyons, CEO of Clockwork, entrepreneur, speaker, activist. That's my identity. Do I have a son? Yes, I do. And am I proud of him? Yes, but my identity isn't wrapped up in him. He gets his own.
He's a whole other person.
Exactly. He's a whole other person. So I often tell people, like, when you go to a party, do you say, hello, my name is Nancy and I'm a mom and a spouse? You don't. You tell them what you do because that's where you find your own worth. And yet when we talk about what we do, we have this really archaic idea that it should be separate from who we are. And because I'm a weirdo, I've never been able to keep it separate. Like this weirdo that you have like exploding in front of you right now, podcast or not, you start talking about this stuff and I'm gonna, like, I have energy and I bring it. And most people are afraid of their energy or afraid of other people's energy. Like the fact that I'm like this, I can only be a CEO. If I worked inside of another company, other people are like, what the hell is the matter with her, right? Like she feels things deeply and she carries herself with this enormous energy, and that is intimidating to people. And I think we have to create spaces where people can bring those gifts and leverage those gifts and use those gifts and channel that energy into the work that they do. Because by telling people you must behave this way and you can't be bigger than me because that's not the way work works, right? And you can't have a creative idea and you can't be any louder and you can't stand dancing at work. Heck no, really? And I say that metaphorically, but I do think that our desire to control, has created workplaces that are stagnant. Yeah. And and then you layer in our need to judge. So not only do you want to control, but if you don't behave the way you're supposed to, I'm going to judge you. Yes. And you're going to feel that. And
financially, socially, all of it at work.
Absolutely. Yes. And that judgment will keep you down. You will behave. And I think behaving is what's gotten us to this place where we are struggling to figure out how to innovate. We're struggling with change in the workplace. We're struggling to keep ahead globally. I mean, only 81% of people in this country say they are not engaged at work. If you look at the Pew research that has been published a billion times, 19% of the population that works, that goes to work every day in some way, shape, or form, says they like their job. That means that 81% of people hate their work or don't care, simply do not, are ambivalent. That includes surgeons and dentists, which means the people that dig around in your body aren't engaged, which is a terrifying thought. And so for me, I think, well, work is fundamentally broken. And why? And when we talk about fixing work, what do? We put things like surveys in place. And we're like, I'll survey the entire workforce and make sure they're fine. And we think technology is going to fix it. Collaborative tools, that'll fix it. But nobody's talking about us and what we need, and I always say a lot of what's broken was established 175 years ago when we were industrialized. Like we look a lot like they started 175 years ago. We're all working, in these spaces. And even if they say, well, there's flexible working or there's remote working, somebody at work is judging that and stigmatizing you for taking advantage of that, right?
They are.
So, and if you're stigmatized for taking advantage of the policies that HR puts in place, then those policies aren't true. If you don't feel like you could actually work from home and nobody's wondering what the hell is she doing, then it's not true.
Yeah.
And then people start coming back to work because they feel like they have to, and then they hate it because that's not where they do their best work. If you talk to anybody who spends any time working at home, they'll tell you, I get so much done at home.
So much,
right? And yet there are still people who are like, well, if your butt's not in the seat, you're not actually working. So there's a zillion reasons, but I think part of it is I'm a loudmouth. Part of it is the internet ushered in a new way of thinking and somebody had to be louder about it. Part of it is I am entirely unemployable. Like if this place fell apart, I couldn't go apply for a job and feel like my talents would be valued. And there are hundreds of thousands of people like me in the world, who are just different in how we carry ourselves and how we show up, how we speak, and how creative we are.
So that 81%, I have them listening right now. Oh. I have some of those 81%. Someone's driving to their job that they hate right now. Somebody is at the job that they hate right now, sitting with your voice in their ear, in earbuds. What's your advice for them? How do they manage that? Because, it's one thing to be the CEO of a company where you literally can say, you want to work from home? I don't care. You want to come in in torn up jeans? I don't care. Like, come in, bring your talents, bring yourself, bring your values, do your thing at my job or at my company, but, perform and do your great work. It's hard for some people in their minds to be that person who's sitting in that cubicle day after day feeling like they have no control. What do they do? Like, how do they handle that and manage that to make their situation better? I think it's really interesting because we look to organizations to do that for us. Yes.
We want the organizations to save us. They should change. Like, it should happen top down, right? And what you don't realize is that the CEO and the leadership team inside of any organization of whatever size, they're living a culture that you aren't, right? Like, they're doing a thing. And I do think that organizations are not responsible for you. And they can't be. We're too big. It's too vast. It's too much responsibility. They can't be responsible for individuals inside of organizations. We want them to be. It's not actually possible. I also think that we have abdicated any responsibility or accountability for what it feels like to go to work. We think, well, my department's screwed, or my boss is an idiot, or this organization is never going to get well, or it's always going to be like this. And so we, instead of being the antibiotic, the little pill that gets taken every day to make the infection, go away, we turn into the infection. It just spreads, right? And so we go to work, and instead of my good energy being contagious, we let that toxicity affect us, and we become just like everybody else. It's always interesting to me, like when somebody gets hired into a workplace, you have to ask yourself how long before they become what the broken part is, right?
Yeah.
Like, how long before the organization infects this new, enthusiastic, interesting, creative, excited, you get a new job, you're excited, you're scared, it doesn't matter what you're doing. We're all excited and scared when we get a new job. And how long before the organization destroys all of that and makes you one of them, right?
Interesting.
And so for me, I sort of feel like we have to believe that one human can make change. We have to believe, and we have to hold ourselves accountable for it. And we have to hold off the negative energy. And one of the things I tell people is you may not be able to impact an entire organization. You may not be able to change, how it feels to work at, I'm not going to say the name of any large organization because I don't want to offend anybody, but, some big multinational company. You might not be able to change how it feels to work for everyone, but there are microcultures inside of every organization, and you can create change there on your project team, in your department, in your division. And I think you push back on that unhealthy energy and you decide, I'm going to work happy. When people ask me how I am, I'm going to look at them. I'm not going to say I'm busy. I'm going to smile, because a smile is huge, right? Like, it's not about smiling when you're pretty. It's about smiling when you want to share positive energy. Like, the whole world is so busy. The other thing I remind people of all the time is we default to the negative. Humans like to talk about about what's negative, right?
Oh my God, I like you so much.
So what?
I'm so happy.
Well, when you ask somebody how they are, oh, my hip hurts, or my husband's a jerk, or my kids are impossible, or I can't get everything done, or I'm so busy. But we never say, I'm so great. I'm so great. And I'm great. Like I was waiting for my kid this morning at this field trip that I volunteered to chaperone for, and I was probably 15 minutes early, and the teacher said, oh, I'm sorry you were waiting. And I said, are you kidding me? I've been standing under lilacs for 15 minutes. Like, when do you give yourself permission to stand under lilacs for 15 solid minutes and just breathe? Just breathe. But we don't look for those things, right? We don't look for that. I don't give myself time for lilacs, right? So when we talk to each other, we talk about the stuff that sucks instead of focusing on the stuff that's kind of awesome. And if we start spending more time, and it's like a muscle, you have to exercise,
oh my
right?
God, I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out.
All right.
I'm freaking out.
Good.
I swear to God, I'm freaking out. Keep going. I'm gonna stop talking. I'm stopping pounding on the table.
I love it. But it's like a muscle. You have to exercise it. It's really easy to go, my hip hurts. It's really hard to say, I got to drive to work today with the windows down, and have you smelled spring? Like, I want to cry right now. You know, the other reason I want to cry is because one of the things that just occurred to me today, this is sort of negative, but it's kind of interesting, is how many lilac seasons do I have left in my life? Like, not many. Like, I need to find those 15 minutes to stand under some lilacs. But we've gotten so caught up. And so I guess in some ways, when I grow up, what I want to be is a preacher who reminds people of this stuff. Because if we put a stake in the ground and we stand solidly in this stuff, which we have control over, we can actually infect the people around us with better energy, and we can make work feel better. And culture isn't what they decide it is. The powers that be, the leaders. Culture is how work feels. It's how, like, we talk a lot about culture and we say things like the benefits, the salary, the crap in the refrigerator. Do they buy you lunch once in a while? Do they give you some free time? Do they give you extra PTO? No, that's not culture. That's perks. Those are gimmicks. Culture is, how does it feel? Do you feel like these people have your back? Do you feel like you share some goodness with each other? Do you have a friend there? I mean, like, do you celebrate seeing each other? If you don't, go someplace else. Go someplace else. Find people you can celebrate with. I get a little passionate. I'm sorry.
Freaking out. I just banged on the table, and I don't even think that the person who edits my episodes can like cut that out because we were like talking at the time. So just leave it in. It's cool. There's so much there, and I just can't even. I'm just going to link to a whole bunch of stuff on your show notes page, and I'm going to send you a whole bunch of links. Because we are like one mind.
All right. Amazing. I love it.
Super excited
about
this.
I love it. That's great.
Random question for you. Is there anything that you're afraid of that actually freaks you out, that you would have to, not like spiders or some dumb thing like that, but like, is there anything real that actually freaks you out?
Oh, I mean, you shared that you have a daughter and one on the way, another kid on the way. Yeah. I have a son. Anything happening to him, I want his life to be swell, not without failure, but swell. Or my spouse. I'm afraid of the same things that any of us who have our hearts walking around outside of our bodies are afraid of. I have been afraid of failing. Last year I had a really crappy year, just business-wise. And I think part of it was the election. Part of it was, the whole nation was going, what's about to happen? And clients did the same thing. We're having the best year we've ever had this year, so I have no complaints. And in the middle of last year, I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, if something happens, my reputation is done for, right? And as an entrepreneur, you're always like, 4 months away from utter destruction, right? Like, It doesn't matter how great of a year we're having this year. You're whatever. So these are not new thoughts. I've had them before. But I went home and one day and I was having an anxiety attack. And my spouse said, "We live in an apartment. Like, what is home to you?" I said, "Well, you and Mac." And my spouse was like, "Well, then we're solid. Like, we can live in one room if we have to." And I thought, okay, what's the worst that can happen? So when I think about it, like, the worst that can happen, I can handle. So there's not a lot to be afraid of. It's like, if the worst that can happen is I get to have my little family in a little apartment, okay, I can live with that. So not much anymore. Not much anymore. I'm afraid of letting people down. I never want to let people down. So I really try to keep my promises and not overcommit, which I think is our nature, you know, especially as women. Yeah. I think women don't know how to say no. I'm always afraid of letting people down, but that's something I just try not to do.
Yeah.
So not much else.
What is your biggest piece of advice for other women? Because I'm sitting here across the table with a certain number of minutes with a serious powerhouse, and I feel like I just need to ask you the most open-ended question ever and let you just fill it. Because, no pressure, but drop some wisdom on us here. Seriously.
Listen, women are their own worst enemies. We all have the little demon that sits on all of our shoulders and I always say to people, if you say you don't have that internal voice, that inner voice that tells you how horrible you are, how unworthy you are, you're lying, because we all have it. And I think just really working on recognizing how amazing you are, that inner voice is a liar. And I think letting it have any kind of power just means you waste time. And I think, we have to stop valuing ourselves for how big our butts are and stop valuing ourselves for, what we look like and, whether or not our shoes are the right shoes. We have to start recognizing we have great big brains and amazing energy and the ability to multitask. And we are awesome at creating community and forging relationships. And we need to do what men do, which is buy and sell from each other, do business with each other, make connections for each other, because that's how men have ruled the world for centuries. And I always say to people when I do a talk, especially with women, I always say to women, oftentimes women will ask me, how do you have it all? And I will say, I don't have it all. I have a wife. Do you know what wives are? They are magical fairies who live behind the scenes and have made it possible for men to rule the world for centuries. Mm-hmm. And they need to step up and even women with careers are those wives, right? It doesn't matter. There is no distinction. Wives make it possible for the world to work. And I think women have always been doing the work. They've always existed behind the scenes, making things possible. And I think it's just a matter of recognizing that and owning it and centering yourself in it. I think we are all powerful, amazing creatures, and there is nothing that isn't normal. Whoever you are, whatever you do, whatever you're into, there's a space for it. And sometimes it's just on you to make that space and value all of your gifts. I think our families of origin have messed us up. I think, who our parents wanted us to be is a haunting message that we carry with us into our, middle age. And then we start freaking out because we're getting old and we can't fix it. The other thing that I'm realizing as somebody who is absolutely in the middle part of my life is there is nothing I'm too old for. I can start anything I want. It was awesome to me to read that Julia Child didn't start her real career until she was 50.
Yeah.
And there's so many of those people. Have you read that list? The people that didn't actually start doing what they were meant to do till they were 50.
It's crazy.
But how often do we tell ourselves, I'm too old for that? Or I start a job at 30. Well, I guess this is who I am. Mm-hmm. It isn't. It's like this speaking thing. I've just been doing it for the last probably 8 years, maybe 10 years. And now I realize I want to do more of this. I want to be a speaker. I want to be a preacher. I want to inspire women. And I think they need to see me, my big butt and my, my crazy ways and my weird sense of humor. Women need to see that we come in all different shapes and sizes. And some of us are total weirdos and some of us are perfect and appropriate. And it's all good. It's all great. There's room for all of us. And we need to hold each other up.
I have about 700 more questions and not any more minutes, which is horrible and awesome all at the same time, because it's a testament to how much just wisdom and experience and just awesomeness you have to share.
Oh, you're kind.
I honestly can't thank you enough for, number one, checking off one of the major, things that I wanted to accomplish with this podcast. I'm genuine when I say, you were on that list of people that I was like, no freaking way. I'm writing her down anyway, though, because you never know what happens.
Oh, you're nice.
So I'm beyond excited. Before I let you go, I have to ask you the last question that I ask every single person who's on the podcast. Mm-hmm. We are compiling a Spotify Power playlist of motivational songs to help pump other women up, and I need your contribution to the playlist.
Okay, so I told you I was a theater major, and musical theater is my thing. I'm a big old shower singer. So I would say it either has to be, it's probably Don't Rain on My Parade from Funny Girl with Barbara Streisand. That or I'm the Greatest Star.
I think
either one of them are perfect for a motivational playlist.
I love it. And I like a rule breaker, so I will take 2, and that would be wonderful. Seriously, there is so much that I could dive into that I can't go down 8 rabbit holes with you, because we would just be here for the next 8 hours. We can
if you want. So this is delightful.
I mean, beyond grateful that you were willing to take this time for us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I was happy to do it.
You get it now, don't you? I mean, I hope after listening to that interview, you can understand why Nancy Lyons is somebody that I have admired for such a long time. And I actually struggled with what direction to take this outro for her episode, because we went over so much, like so many amazing topics. I just had no idea where to take it. So I'm going to hit a bunch of them, because it would just be crazy of me to not call this out. I feel like I would be leaving value on the table, and I don't want to do that with this episode. So I'm just going to rattle through a bunch of things that if I were you, I would absolutely be taking away. Number 1, gumption. Gumption, 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 gumption. This woman embodies it. From the point that she looked at her career early on and said, I believe I have more to offer, to the point that she decided, you know what? Computers are awesome. And she taught herself how to code, to the point where she reached out to the men who would eventually become her business partners and told them that if they didn't talk to her, she was going to stalk them, and then offered to work for just a 3-month salary. I mean, that is some serious gumption. That takes some serious confidence. And I hope that just by listening to this interview and by taking in the words that she said, I hope some of that rubs off on you. I mean, heck, on all of us. That is incredible. Second, I asked Nancy where that gumption and where that confidence comes from. And she gave an answer that I've actually heard a couple of people give. If you go back in the recent handful of episodes, I started asking people this question because it is so interesting what their answers are. And a lot of people have talked about getting that confidence from their moms. And what that tells me is our daughters are listening. Our daughters are watching us. And that makes me think about a few things. If we currently are struggling to quote unquote do it all, if we're struggling to balance work and home, and we're struggling to do everything that's on our plates, an unfair proportion of everything that is on our plates, my question to you is, how are we better preparing our daughters to not have to do that? How are we doing that? I can't answer that question right now necessarily, but it's one that I want to pose. It's one that's important. In a similar vein, if we're struggling because we feel like we don't have time for self-care, or we're putting ourselves last, what are we teaching our daughters to do? And then third, if we hate our bodies, if we're constantly talking about what we don't like about them and how imperfect they are, what are we saying to our daughters about how they should view their own bodies? They are watching and they're learning from us. And we can help craft the direction that their lives are going to go in terms of how much confidence they approach their daily lives with. And Nancy is a testament to that. Now, I want to dive into some of the amazing stuff she said about work. 81% of people are not engaged at work. That's amazing. And I totally believe it. I spent time in big corporate environments, and there are so many people who are disengaged and who are not interested at all in the work that they're doing. And I adore that she talked about how we personally can impact the microculture around us at our job rather than becoming quote unquote one of them or part of the problem. You know, this is that notion of radical responsibility again. Like, no, you are not at fault or to blame for what your company is, right? Like, you don't control that trajectory. You're not in the CEO's seat. Heck, the CEO probably doesn't control that. But we can be radically responsible for how we show up every single day and what we choose to do with the time that we're there. And I adore I mean, this is literally, I was like banging on the table at this point because Nancy talked about how we default to the negative. And I totally agree. If you listened to episode 59 of the podcast, it was the negativity addiction episode. I went all into this about how we default to using negativity as a way to connect to one another. And it does not serve us. It does not allow you to live your best life and make the most out of your days when you're showing up spewing negativity all over the place. And I love the way that she said, positivity is a muscle. You have to exercise it. Yes, 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 yes. In that same episode, episode 59, I talked about this intentional mindset practice around positivity and balancing your thoughts out so that you have a better view of your day-to-day life. This is like practicing free throws before you enter a basketball game. I also love during that same exact conversation, she talked about, the anecdote of having to wait for her kids for a little while and standing underneath a lilac tree and smelling lilacs for 15 minutes. And then she asked herself the question, how many lilac seasons do I have left? Episode 40 of the podcast. I'll warn you, I probably swear more in that episode than in the rest of the episodes of the podcast combined. But the reason for that is this notion of how short and finite and precious our lives are is something that I am so incredibly passionate about. And you should be too, because yours is also short, yours is also finite, and yours is also precious. So how many lilac seasons do you have left? And how much of that time do you want to waste on negative, stupid things? It is so worth it to cultivate a culture of positivity around you. Your life is so precious, and you owe it to yourself to live like your life depends on it, because it does. Live your life in the best, most fulfilling way possible. And last, I want to talk about Nancy's comment about how women can be their own worst enemies. Recently, I released an episode 66, where I talked about how to recognize and attempt to silence your inner critic. This is an exercise that was based on a book that I recently read. It was so powerful for me. Please, 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 if you have that inner critic who is holding you back, who is lying to you about your potential and your power and your ability as the most amazing person that you are, they are lying to you. Please listen to that episode and go through that exercise. It is transformative. I also loved that I'm just plugging episodes like crazy. Like I said, this was just an amazing conversation. We were so aligned. It was awesome. I also love that Nancy talked about women needing to support one another. In episode 65, you met Kateri and Angel, who are the co-founders of a company named Maya. So Nancy talked about women supporting each other with their dollar. That is exactly what the goal of Maya is. Maya is attempting to connect women-owned businesses with consumers who want to spend their money in a way that aligns with their values. Please, please check that episode out. Check out maya.community if you are interested in learning more about them. And I adore that Nancy said, whoever you are, whatever you do, there's a space for you. And sometimes you have to make your own space. Showing up authentically in our day-to-day lives. Early on, I said I asked Nancy this question about where she got her confidence, and the notion of she got it from her mom came up. Another extremely common answer I get to that question is I was able to be confident when I started living authentically. When I started living as my own best 100% self. That's when people start to be confident, because they're not wasting energy and wasting mental space trying to fake being somebody that they're not. Go be your biggest weirdo. Take it from her. She is successful, she is amazing, and she is the biggest weirdo, self-professed. Go be a big weirdo.
Before we close out today, I want to say thank you to my producer, Cameron Hill, and to my incredible sponsor, Modern Well. If you want to learn more about how you can reach your goals in a one-of-a-kind work-life community, visit www.modernwell.co. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who might benefit from this inspiring message. And if you have a moment, click the link in the episode description to leave me a rating and a review on iTunes. It would mean so much to me. Finally, I want to remind you that it is absolutely possible to live a happy, fulfilling life, even in spite of all of the chaos and demands we all experience. Sign up at aprilseifert.com to gain access to tools that will help you do just that. I have carefully created and curated a set of tools that combine the powerful fields of psychology and design thinking to help you intentionally create a fulfilling, happy life you love. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and until next week, stay inspired.